Today I have with me Tom Equels. He is the author of The Horseman's Tale, and he's also a veteran of Vietnam. And Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll talk a little bit about the book and what you do for therapy.
Sure. Um, well, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, uh, lived there until I was about 12 or 13. I spent my first few years in Florida while my father was in the Navy at Key West, but I guess one winter they decided they were going back to Florida, you know, and so I went to high school in Florida and enlisted in the Army in 1970. As soon as I graduated, I'd been recruited to go to flight school in a warrant officer flight training program that the Army had developed, and I left, just after graduation at the age of 18 for the Army, and when I was 19, I was flying a Cobra gunship in Vietnam. So that was
That's
my
awesome.
first professional career. Um, when I got back, I was selected, even though there was a lot of reduction in force after the Vietnam War ended, and I was there as it ended in '73, the U.S. involvement anyway, and but I was selected to be an instructor pilot as well as TRADOC training and doctrine command project officer. So I served an additional 4 years, and I used that time to get my bachelor's of science and master's of science, and then got out of the Army and went to law school. So I spent many years as a lawyer and devoted a large part of my legal practice to social justice pro bono activities. I mean, I had a business practice. I was a business litigator, but a part of my practice, I was always involved with poverty law, civil rights, things like that. And I did that because I went to Vietnam out of what I thought were not just patriotic ideals, but based upon what I believe were concepts that uh, people had a right to live in a free and democratic society around the world. Concepts of democracy versus what was then communist autocracy. Now, my political beliefs, had very little to do with the real politics of what goes on. Because when you're 19 years old, you you don't always understand how the world works. But
Right.
when I returned from Vietnam and got out of the Army and graduated from law school, I made a point of doing, continuing to do what I thought I could to fight for social justice, fight for important idealistic issues that I think were at the base of why I went to Vietnam as well.
That's
So,
awesome. Thank you very much for your service, Tom. That's an incredible start to your journey. And now, how did that end? How did your career at that point influence what you do now?
well, right now I'm the chief executive officer of an immunology research and development company. I've always had a strong interest in science, and we're developing a particular drug called Ampligen for purposes of providing a therapy for very lethal unmet medical needs in cancer, as well as some serious debilitating diseases. In cancer, we've had tremendous clinical results in late stage pancreatic cancer, in tests that we've done over clinical tests in humans that are being conducted over in the Netherlands at Erasmus Medical Center, and we've begun a journey developing as a therapy for long COVID with the more severe chronic fatigue-like conditions tied to that syndrome, post-COVID syndrome.
Wow, that's
So
incredible.
that's what I do now, and the reason is the same as when I was doing a death penalty case for somebody who I thought might be innocent, or helping tenants in a poor neighborhood with a rent strike against an abusive landlord. The reason is, I think we're put here to make a difference. And I wrote this book that we're talking about today because I wanted to take some of the things that I've learned, put it into a story so that it was interesting. Somebody just talking about their, little pearls of wisdom gets old after a page or two. But but the book was written to make a difference.
Yeah, I actually I got the book here. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm very excited to crack it open and get into it because I have a 5-year-old son who has autism, and we are a very uh, how do you say, we're not, we kind of treat it as it's just the way it is. We don't really attach any stigmas to it. We kind of go with the flow. It is what it is kind of thing. But we also try to keep in mind that there are therapies that we need to do. There are lessons that we need to learn. We need to do all kinds of stuff to help our 5-year-old learn and grow. And one of those things that we did, we got a cat. And while you don't work with cats, you do work with horses. And I wanted to talk about a little bit about you had mentioned that there are themes of autism in the Horseman's Tale. I'd like to briefly get into that and talk about, like, what made you what is the catalyst that made you decide to put feature autism in the book?
Well, I too am familiar with autism from members of our family who are autistic, and the the our family's experience has been one where we didn't treat it as stigmatization and something to run away from, but rather approached it with love and very positive attitude. And this is going back 50 years, well, not quite 50 years, but our experience is in a number of occasions, including Down syndrome, as well, it led us to that approach naturally. I think, different people based upon their background sometimes approach things differently. My family, I'm grateful to say, when we have problems, initially we aren't always on the same page or whatever, but ultimately we somehow reach a consensus, and it's often based with a foundation of love, so that what flows from that works a lot of time.
I couldn't have put
And
that better myself. That's much how we approach it ourselves.
and I think when you approach a problem with love, the solution is always sweeter rather than bitter. So
And it's almost always apparent.
yeah.
It almost presents itself sometimes. And that's incredible because so basically what you're saying is you had some autism experience in your life and your family, and you kind of wanted to share that experience with the world because in my experience, autism it is stigmatized. Even still in 2024, it's stigmatized. Not a lot of people know a whole lot about autism. And my little guy, like I'd mentioned, he's 5, and I've talked about him on the show a lot. So I apologize to the listeners who've heard these stories before. But my 5-year-old, he doesn't present his diagnosis outwardly. You kind of have to spend some time with him to understand he's autistic. But it's like we don't treat him any different than we do any of our other children, and we treat him as he's just as important as everybody else in the family. And I think that's very important to acknowledge that there are differences, but not treat them different. Does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense. And when you say not treat them different, if one of the other children were exhibiting similar issues, you would treat them the same way.
Right.
It's because it's your child. God gives us children to love and to share our wisdom and to nurture and to guide. And sometimes you know, the children we get or the grandchildren, or, are given to us as lessons for us, not for them. And we learn and grow in wisdom and spirit as a result of how we go through that lesson. So I've learned this with horses, that sometimes when you have a horse that has issues, that where it's a little outside the norm, and sometimes it could be even a very dangerous horse. You have to step back and think about what you want to do. But then if you're gonna train the horse, at least with me, if I can't train the horse with a more loving and thoughtful approach, I just don't do it, because it's better off being a wild horse, right? My experience, and I've been through a lot of violence in my life. Is violence rarely improves one's character. I see your cat showed up.
Yeah, he's my buddy.
But and whether you're the one administering the violence or receiving the violence, it's rarely beneficial in terms of personal growth. So with animals, I learned as a training approach, a non-violent, thoughtful, loving, positive reinforcement training approach that works. And those same techniques, I think, work with people, and how we engage with people, especially if we're in charge of the education and formation of a child. We need to approach that very seriously, and with love and respect for the child, and with the idea that the things that we do will make a difference in that child's life 30, 40, 50 years from now.
That's incredible. That so you had made this not comparison, but you had said that horses, you have to treat them with individuality. And
Yes.
that's kind of what it's like for parenting and children. You have to treat them as individuals. And I have four children. And so my oldest is 21, my youngest is 5. I'm 39. So
Mm-hmm.
we've got a large age gap in between a couple of our children. And I sometimes find myself having to explain to the older children, like, look, we're not spoiling the younger children. We're not treating them, any more special, or we don't love them any more than we loved you. It's just each of you kids is different, and you each require a different kind of attention. While the oldest may not need this certain kind of attention, the youngest may need this kind of attention. And what works for the oldest may not work for the youngest. So we do have to treat our kids with some individuality. And so that was what you were basically saying about the horses. You got to treat them with individual care. You kind of got to get to know their personality, and you have to love them through it. And I love every bit of that, Tom. So the transformative power of equine therapy for mental health. Let's dive into that, because like I said, I've got a cat here, and he does amazing wonders for my mental health. And that's one of the reasons why I got a cat in the first place. I say that we got the cat for the kid, but he's really my cat. So, I mean, you see, he's out here playing with me in my studio, and so the transformative power of equine therapy for mental health. Can you describe what working with horses does for your mental health and how it may help other folks?
Well, certainly, and you know, the main character in our book, The Horseman's Tale, is autistic and does have post-traumatic stress syndrome. But the and there are discussions of equine therapy where he helps others with equine therapy later in life, using his horses with autistic children, for example. But his personal equine therapy evolved almost imperceptibly, because he'd been with horses all of his life. But much like me, the protagonist lives on a horse farm, and the horses are there every day, and he's involved with training horses and working with horses, but he also has his own personal horses. So the benefits of equine therapy are there for him, much like being with your cat every day. If that's therapeutic, you get that, and you're not thinking of it so much as therapy. It's just natural. But he realizes over time that some of the old horse wisdoms really do apply. And one of the old sayings, and it goes back for ages, this is not something recent, is the best thing for the inside of a man. In other words, the psychology of a man is the outside of a horse. So the best thing for the inside of a man is the outside of a horse, is something people have been saying for, who knows, 1,000 years. Why are they saying that? They're saying that because when you have a horse and work with a horse and connect with a horse, there's a change in how you think and how you act and how you feel. And the reason for that, and especially with horses, if you have the opportunity to do it, is horses are extremely empathetic. Their empathy IQ is far superior to most humans that I've met. And by empathy, I'm some of the readers might not know exactly what I'm talking about. The empathy means that they feel what you feel. So if you're feeling anxious, they feel anxious. If you're feeling happy, they feel happy. And sometimes the converse is true with, if you're sensitive as a person, you can feel what they're feeling. It's palpable. I mean, this is not something that is like a segment of delusion. After it happens a few times, you realize you're sensing what they're feeling, and some of that probably comes from objective observations. You can, just like with a person, you can look at a person and tell when they're nervous, right? But the feeling inside that comes along with those observations is something like, why am I feeling this way? The first few times, then you realize is, I'm getting this from the horse, just like the horse gets it from you. One of the things that my father taught me when I was a little boy, and I started riding. I was on a horse, I think, when I was 2 years old. Not by myself, but in the saddle with one of my parents. And but he said, because horses are big, strong, sometimes headstrong animals. He said, whenever there's a problem with the horse, if the horse seems like it's afraid or it's spooking, you have to remember, don't be afraid, because that fear will just make things worse. And just take a deep breath, put a smile on it. He said just smile, because just smiling helps, whether you feel like smiling or not, and just try to find a calm, happy place, because that's the only thing, in addition to knowing how to handle the horse, that will make things better. And that works most of the time,
I
through my
find
experience.
I find in my experience when I've been around horses, that you're exactly right. If you're anxious, they're going to feel anxious. So you got to keep that calm. And honestly, Tom, I've seen videos of just not even being there in person, but videos of people brushing horses. And there's something very cathartic just watching a video, you know? And so that's incredible to hear that other people see that stuff as much as we all have, our mental health issues. There are things out there that can absolutely help us, and taking care of an animal such as a horse, equine therapy. And it's not like you don't have to go out and buy a horse. There are places where you can go visit horses, and I'm sure there's ranches pretty much everywhere where if you just call them up and say, hey, I need some therapy. can I come over and brush your horse? Be like, yeah, we have to pay money to do that. So,
Right, and but also there are equine therapy centers, and typically these are nonprofit organizations that for somebody who's in need, they provide those services for free or at a minimal cost, and it is important, and I've learned that over the years I've been riding. I guess, like almost 70 years on my own. I started riding by myself when I was 4 or 5 years old. Is that, these principles, work, and they don't work all the time, though. If I can digress this wasn't too long ago. In our farm is in Florida, and we have a season out in the forest called spider season, and we get these really big spiders. Like we call them banana spiders. We don't have any bananas out in that forest, but that's what they're called. And they grow webs across the path, and if you're not paying attention, you can get into the web. And I was out riding, I wasn't paying like that. I was just having a good time, and went through one of those webs, and it did. I didn't even know I went through the web because it got on the horse, and these spiders, when they start crawling up. So the next thing I know, I've got the spider, crawling up onto my face. And despite all the training and experience I'd had, I was like, so immediately the horse is, like off like lightning. So, we survived, but it was a true testament as to how, if you allow yourself, to be, like, put into a state of intense fear, the horse immediately, senses that without knowing what it is at all. So that, these are the kinds of things that you learn that are testaments to how these principles work.
awesome. That's that's so that's such a funny story. That happens to me sometimes just walking along. As we live right next to the woods here, and I'll be just walking through the yard, and I one time there was a web going from my garage to my car, and
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't very far, but it was from the top of the house down to the hood of my car, and I walked right through it. And I, like you said, I kind of freaked out a little bit. It's not that it's not that I was really scared. It's just, we got the ickies and crawling on you and stuff. It just feels gross. So you just kind of freak out a little bit. And I could just imagine how that would make a horse feel.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So another thing that I wanted to talk about was improving mental well-being through creative outlets. For me, that's a very special thing because this is my creative outlet. I'm a very creative person, and I attribute that to some of the things that I've been through and coping mechanisms. And ultimately, like, I think maybe sometimes being creative is the reason why I am the way I am. And this kind of gives me an outlet to be creative, to create, to talk, to visit with folks that I don't ordinarily visit with. Like, so the transformative power of equine therapy kind of goes hand in hand with creative outlets for mental health as well, because it's a creative solution for for an issue.
Well, I
So
agree.
what was the process of writing the book? And you live on a horse ranch, so you're probably pretty busy all the time, and also you've got your career going. So are you a creative person, and did writing this book help you with a creative outlet?
Well, I think that under anybody's standards, I would be probably qualified as an extremely creative person. Uh, from the time I started in the Army, I was writing articles, aviation related articles that were published, written law review and law journal articles. I've written short stories all my life, and in fact, this novel started with a short story that I wrote, which was a true story after one of my horses passed away. and I just felt like I had something I wanted to express and it was, in a way, it was like a journaling therapy. I mean, I said I was writing a story, but I was getting those feelings on paper to help me as well. Um, and I've been a painter for, I mean, decades. Some of my paintings are in churches uh, in the United States and in Europe. A lot of them are religious type paintings, but some of them are related to personal things. I was always a big fan of Van Gogh, so I've done a few homages to Van Gogh, and I have a painting of uh, burial at Arlington Cemetery of a friend of mine who was missing in action from Vietnam. When they recovered him, it was many years later. It's called Lest We Forget. That is in the Veterans Clinic near the farm. But so these paintings are a creative outlet, and usually when I have the inspiration to do a painting, it's probably something that I'm working at personally at the same time. And um, I don't mean to be like religious or
Oh
anything
no, go
per
ahead.
se, but the Bible starts talking about how man is created in the image of God, right? And God is in the universe this ultimate creative force, because none of this, under that would be here without God. Now, so I look at it as tapping into our creative abilities is tapping into our spiritual development at the same time. You're not just painting something, you're growing in spirit because you're creating something. Now, whether you're creating a medical therapy, or whether you're creating a painting, or whether you're creating a story or a novel, that process of creation is you operating at a different plane from people who are not creating.
Yes. Yes, that is awesome. Tom, you've got an amazing story, man. You've experienced a lot in your life, and
Too much
I'm just
sometimes.
I'm so thankful that you're here sharing this with me. I can't. Wow, so to recap, the conversation so far, you're a Vietnam veteran. You had an illustrious career in the military. You are currently in you cancer therapy development. You do equine therapy. You own a horse ranch. You live on a horse ranch. You paint. You write books. Is there anything that you can't do, Tom?
Yes. I'm
Probably
72
a lot
years
of stuff.
old. Even though I'm 6'3", I'm 72 years old and I have arthritis, so I can't dunk a basketball.
So I bet that equine therapy helps out quite a bit for the arthritis as well, because sometimes, like, I have arthritis in my back, and for me, waking up in the morning is the worst part,
Hmm.
because it takes me a little bit to limber up. I can't just wake up and go like some folks can. I have to have my coffee. I have to limber up a little bit. But with the more I'm active, the better it gets. And so I can just imagine how equine therapy would help, or just taking care of horses in general. You live on a ranch.
Well,
I can just imagine the benefits of that.
I think it's very important for overall health to be active,
Yeah.
and physical activity, and horses involve a lot of physical activity. And for example, just riding burns 400 calories an hour, which most people
Wow.
don't realize that because
I
it involves all your, core muscles and upper leg muscles in a way that you're burning calories as you ride the horse. So there's a lot of physical activity there, but you have to, walk and I mean, I play pickleball and tennis, and just as much as I can do, and try to stay as active as I can. Under the ever encroaching restraints of age. Um,
Yeah.
and you have to also remember that you're not 23 anymore. So it's like
Sometimes it's
you know
hard to remember that, because when you're feeling good, Tom, when you're having a great day, right? Let's just say you're out in the field, you just took a horse for a run and getting that exercise and stuff. You're feeling great, and then you just see a wall. You know you can't step off that wall. You're going to break your leg, but you
uh,
try anyway.
yeah.
I've done that stuff. Like it's very hard to get your mind to catch up to your body.
Well, see, that's because you're 50. So if you keep doing that, I hope by the time you're 70, you won't jump off the wall.
Right, right, absolutely. Well, like sometimes, we just forget sometimes. Like like I'm only 39. I have some arthritis in my back, and it's been like that for 20 some years. But I have my good days and I have my bad days. But it's just like I have more good days than bad. And I have a 5-year-old kid. So he's running around doing things and without a moment's hesitation, I think, well, I could do that too. And so I'll chase after him and I'm like, oh, I can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the what is the art of horsemanship?
Well, there's another old saying. But, the art of horsemanship is keeping the horse between you and the ground. So,
That's a good one.
yeah.
That's a very good way to how to explain that. Keeping the horse between you and the ground. I like that.
There have been a few occasions when I violated that rule, you know, and it was very painful. But
And
that's much of it. But really, the art of horsemanship comes back to like truly great horsemen. Um, and people sometimes who are called horse whisperers and everything understand the
that old Robert
emotional.
Redford movie.
That's right. The emotional and psychological and spiritual connection that can exist between a person and a horse. Um, there was a saying that goes back probably 1,000 or more years that horse masters that were considered to be like horse whisperers used, and in English it would be translated as both as one. Now think about that. Both as one. What is that talking about? That's talking about the empathetic bond that I described earlier. So once you learn how to do that, then almost everything between you and your horse gets better. Even if there's a big problem, it gets better because you have that connection.
So you are almost an extension of the horse, and the horse is almost an extension of you at that point. You kind of come together. So the art of horsemanship, that's man, that's a great way to put that. Keeping, and I know you said this, old saying, but keeping the horse between you and the ground, and that can parallel, like how we grow as people. We can use little sayings like that for personal growth. And so how do you take the art of horsemanship, and how does that parallel to personal growth? How do you get personal growth from the art of horsemanship?
Well, I think the personal growth comes naturally. Um, we're we're put into this life, with certain intellectual capabilities and spiritual capabilities, then physical capabilities, or disabilities, But we come in with a set of tools, let's say, for life. And then we start going through experience after experience after experience. Now, we have to learn how to open up our toolbox, our personal toolbox that's intrinsic, that we were gifted with, and learn from those experiences. So for me, because horses have almost always been a part of my life. I mean, there have been times when I wasn't around horses, like in Vietnam and so forth. But almost always, for me, that relationship with the horse became a part of my toolbox, and it allowed me to learn things that I might not have learned without a horse. Now,
Yeah, we were talking about that just a little while ago, how, like I had mentioned, just watching that video of brushing the horse can be cathartic. And I could just imagine being there with the horse. You live with horses every day. And so we were just talking also about religion. And do you find that taking care of horses and equine therapy does help with that personal growth, especially with religious growth? Do you find that that might help you with religious growth as well?
well, I like to make a distinction between religious and spiritual. Um,
I as well. I love to do that as
I,
well.
I perceive religion is sort of, the space for spiritual politics.
Exactly.
A
That's
lot of times
exactly a great way to put it.
things that are involved in any particular religion are dogmatic, based upon the word of man, not necessarily spiritual understandings. Religion can sometimes confuse spiritual development. But if you rephrase that question in terms of spirituality, then what we're talking about is, as you experience these opportunities to learn and grow spiritually, that relationship with the horse or the cat or the dog or the wolf or helps you to grow, and even more so, the relationships you have with other people. The relationship with a horse is not unique. People can have empathetic, meaningful connections with other people all the time. But you have to open yourself to that, and you have to be dealing with somebody who's open to that. People have empathetic capacity, but somehow many of us are trained in our early stages to shut that down, and that's like with children. It's very easy to shut that down with negative reinforcement and dismissiveness, but it's very hard to turn it back on. That's where sometimes the horse comes in, is they first realize this with an animal, not another person. But the optimal empathetic relationship and connection is between two people. So that when and I address this in the book, I mean, it's in a fictional context, but when a man and a woman can look at each other and feel both as one, that's a very special feeling. It
I
doesn't have to be something shared with your cat, or a horse. It's best shared with your friends and family and lovers.
Man, Tom, wow. So I'm not religious at all by any means, but I am very, very spiritual. And that is so awesome because, like, you were just talking about a man and woman, two people. My wife and I have that connection.
Oh,
We
that's
we
beautiful.
it is amazing. The other
It's
day,
probably a lot less expensive than a horse too.
yeah, for sure, for sure. The other day, I'm gonna remember this probably for the rest of my life. But the other day, my wife was in the kitchen She's cooking dinner, I think. And I was just walking through the living room and go to sit down. And Tom, I shit you not, I had a song pop into my head. I had a little earworm, but I was singing it silently in my head. And I was just, and then out of nowhere, my wife started singing the song. And that's
Hmm.
exactly what you're talking about. Just that connection, And so that's incredible. Like this whole conversation has been incredible, Tom. It's so my next point is, why is this book needed more than ever now?
Well, there's an aspect to this book, and uh, part of the reason I wrote it is because I think that there's some lessons here that I thought I might be able to convey in a fictional format that are timely. You know, the book starts out where the protagonist, Jake Montgomery, he's a retired Marine Corps colonel, and he's in his farmhouse, but he's all alone because the children have left. They're all have jobs and families of their own, and about a year earlier, his wife passed away from liver cancer, and he grew up in Ocala, Florida, during the times of segregation, and many people don't realize I lived in Florida when our high school was first desegregated. I was a sophomore when they desegregated the high school. So I remember all the drama and violence and everything associated with that in that Central Florida high school, but for years before, Florida led the country in per capita lynchings. The segregation was strict and brutal. It was state sponsored violence associated with some of these racist and sexist rules. Uh, and so the book starts out where he's sitting in his lazy boy recliner, which is his evening routine, having his whiskey and watching CNN. And there's a special one called "The State of Hate" about Charlottesville and the Ku Klux Klan and the resurgence of the Nazis and all this. And it's irritating him because that's not the America that he believes in, and he experienced what that was really like, in the 1950s and 1960s, and how bad it was, and how bad it was for Florida, because Central Florida today, is just so different from what it was in 1950. You can't even describe it. It's like two different planets, and yet he realized that people want to go back to that, and so he's on edge, and then a commercial comes on, and it's a law firm commercial where they're talking about Camp Lejeune and the contaminated water. If you were at Camp Lejeune from such and such to such and such, and anybody in your family or you have experienced the following things, including liver cancer and birth defects, and he has this epiphany. For the first time, he realizes when he brought his wife and son to Camp Lejeune after Vietnam, he was stationed there, that their second son, which was born at Camp Lejeune, died of birth defects. His wife had just recently passed from liver cancer, and he realizes that it's because of that, and he explodes. He does have PTSD, and sometimes things trigger it, but this is the first time he knows what's triggering it. It's not like somebody's driving erratically in traffic, and you have this explosion of rage. He knows exactly what caused it, and how it relates to him. And he was taking journaling therapy from the Veterans Administration called written exposure therapy, or WET. And he sits down and writes, and he recognizes the triggering event, but the journaling books that he's been taught from say, just write what's on your mind, what comes to you, and that's what he does. He starts writing what's on his mind, and it all comes out in a 6-hour journaling session. But remember, this is he's writing things that nobody is going to see but him. That's the premise. So things that he would never say to another person, things that he wouldn't want his family to see. His truth is there on this computer journal, and it gives us a chance to do something very interesting. We're looking at a psychological profile of a person who has, without fear, just let it all hang out. And there are a lot of truths that get, built in and developed from that premise that is the foundation for the novel. So he explodes. He throws his whiskey glass at the television, yelling a few profanities and saying that they died because of me. But then he calms himself down, cleans up the mess, and starts to write. And that's where this comes from. And this character, part of his post-traumatic stress syndrome is he's autistic. He was when he was a baby in 1948. They soon recognized at 2 or 3 years old, 4 years old, he had Asperger's, but they didn't know what Asperger's was at that time. They called it infantile schizophrenia, and the doctor said he'll probably be okay, but but his parents took two different approaches to that. The father recognized that would be a stigma that could hurt him, and the father's family had prior experience with this as a disorder, and so the father decided he was just going to train him like you would train a horse, and to behave in a way where it's not detectable. The mother took a different approach and working to help him, to get over apraxia and be able to speak clearly and read and using flashcards and a very hands-on, motherly, loving approach. So that and there were some benefits that they started to identify in the protagonist as a child, because he once he was able to enter into the world of words, because many autistic people think very much like a horse in terms of images. I have the ability sometimes with a horse where if a horse is out in a pasture, I don't yell for the horse to come here or anything like that. I can look at the horse and just picture the horse coming to me, and the horse comes. Now, that could be because the horse wants to see me and saw me.
No, Tom, I really think it's that connection. I really think there's, so I honestly think there's something to that, a little bit more than what we humans might know. If that makes sense to you.
I believe that too, but it's anecdotal information. I'm a scientist as well, so it doesn't pass the scientific method, statistical validity concepts that there could be some other reason the horse did that, but the the fact is that left some children that are autistic, left to their own devices, might never learn to talk or read, so you had, this goes through a loving intervention to help with that part of the process, which obviously makes the father's strict regimen go better, because, you can't beat somebody into reading. You might beat them into shaking hands when they see somebody. But,
Well, that's that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. That's
right.
The same analogy there.
So anyway, over time, Jake, the protagonist, learns to live in this world of words and everything by adopting the persona that allows him to function best. Not necessarily the real him, because he started out at a very young age saying you've got to be different from who you are. And so his ability to, disassociate somewhat becomes, in a way, a burden, but also a tool that he uses as he goes through life.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. I That's really all I had for the book. The questions about the book. That's I think the book the what you said in the very beginning of that question there, that the things that are going on in the time during during the time in the book, at the very beginning of the book, the things that are going on there, and why this book is needed more now than ever. You hit the nail on the head. It is because we are kind of going backwards in history. We are kind of, people don't remember what things were like in the 60s, 70s. And I've seen a lot of things coming back from like the teens and 20s, the 30s, a lot of
Hmm.
anti-Semitism popping up these days. It's absolutely mind-blowing that these things are happening. And so I absolutely agree with you 100% that attention needs to be brought to
Well, well,
these
part of
things.
well, part of the reason I wrote the book was because I did see that special, The State of Hate, and it had me thinking, we really can't go back to that place. I mean, that's not just a backward way of living and thinking, but a dangerous way of living and thinking. Because, think about it. If you can classify and discriminate and not just not like, but imprison and I mean, like with homosexuality, for example, in England, if somebody was a homosexual, they had as one of the punishments castration. I mean, these are things that we've done to each other in the past. And
Yeah,
if we're
we've
to
been here before, guys. Like, knock it
well,
off.
that's right.
Yeah.
So we can't say that thinking like that doesn't have adverse consequences. And what I tried to do, and I hope you'll go out and buy the Horseman's Tale and read the book, because I promise you, it's a good ride and a good read. You'll enjoy it, but I hope too that you'll learn from it, because there are lessons about love at every level and from every angle that are there for the taking, and there are lessons about life that are there for the taking that I think will change your life and make for a better understanding of how we can move forward in terms of our personal development.
So just to kind of wrap it up here and talking about the book, ultimately, you wrote the book because you saw a need for people to understand the consequences of the things that are going on right now, and also, PTSD, autism, therapy, all of that wrapped up into this one book. Tom, I'm very impressed. I can't wait to read this book. And so I that wraps it up, like, for the book portion of it. But I do have a couple questions for you, because
Sure.
you had mentioned you're a pilot in Vietnam, right?
Yes, and I was a pilot for 50 years. I retired from flying when I turned 70. I thought to myself, I'm 70 years old. I
So
most of
not
the
that
flying
long ago, huh?
not that long ago, and I was thinking I'm 70 years old, and most of the flying I would do by myself. It's like when I ride my motorcycle, I just go for a ride. I would just go fly around, and have fun and land and then
So
do it again a
awesome.
couple weeks later. And but but the flying is, if you have any kind of a medical, and at 70 you have the potential for a lot of different medical conditions that make flying impossible. So you're by yourself at 6,000 feet in the air, and whatever's going on, that's not good. So I said, I'll just err on the side of conceding to age and do it ahead of time.
So what kind of aircraft did you fly during Vietnam? Was it the Cobra helicopter?
Yeah, Cobra helicopter gunship during Vietnam. I flew about 300 combat missions, and then but
Wow.
two distinguished flying crosses. That's one of well, I guess it is the highest medal specifically for heroism in aviation combat. After Vietnam, I was an instructor pilot at the United States Army Aviation Center for several years, and also worked on different projects for training and doctrine command, projects that involved developing a training manual for helicopter gunship tactics in what's called a high threat environment, and also developing, because this was at the onset of the computer age. We're talking about the 1970s. Computer generated high quality aviation training simulation, which is where these are trainers where you're in the trainer and you really feel like you're flying and you're able to simulate all kinds of aspects of flying. So I was at the forefront of the development of that, and wrote some articles about aviation simulation in the mid 70s. And then just in July in Army Aviation Magazine, I was asked to participate and put together an article about Army aviation simulation. It's going over a retrospective, especially of the 50 years, because much of what I said in one of these articles was called SFTS, which is Simulated Flight Training Systems, the shape of things to come. So there were a lot of projections about what the future would be in that technology, all of which came true. But I don't claim to have any predictive qualities, because what I'm sorry about is I clearly underestimated what would happen. Because the growth of simulation over 50 years has just been phenomenal. And so it was an article with the deputy director of simulation at Fort Novosel, the Army Aviation Center, that did this highlight. So that came out in Army Aviation Magazine's July issue, and it's an interesting read if you're into geeky stuff.
I am. I'm a military aviation fan. Huge fan of military aviation. Not so much helicopters, but airplanes. And
Me too.
that was my next question. What's your favorite military aircraft?
Well, at my home office, I have a P-51 that is painted across a wall that is about like 12 feet wide. So
That's
I
awesome.
when I was a boy, there was a Pennsylvania Air National Guard unit that was nearby, and that's what they were flying, was P-51s. So I would see those, like flying low over the Ohio River and dipping through the mountains, everyone, and it was just amazing. And I decided that's what I wanted to fly. But by the time I was in high school, P-51s, even though it wasn't that short of a time, had become obsolete. But there was no question in my mind when I got recruited. I'm not sure how they did it, but they picked about a dozen of us to do this presentation. They were trying to recruit us into this flight program when we were seniors in high school, and they had pictures of the different aircraft, and part of it was about the Cobra gunship. And I as soon as I saw that, I said, well, that's not a P-51, but that'll do for me. so, so that's how
Right.
I became a gunship pilot. I mean, it was like a sort of a childhood fantasy.
So this conversation has been amazing, Tom. I live less than 5 miles away from an Air National Guard base.
Uh-huh.
So we just had an air show a couple weeks ago. I saw some P-51 Mustangs flying around, and I tell you what, something I never saw before. Uh, I can't remember what the group's name was, but they brought in four F-16s,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, they flew them over my city in formation during the air. So amazing. But my favorite military aircraft, I bounce between three different aircraft as my favorite. And depending on what mood I'm in, is the answer you're going to get. My first, my very first favorite aircraft that I ever had was the SR-71 Blackbird.
Mm-hmm.
And then my second favorite, the F-117 Nighthawk, which if you didn't know, the F-117 Nighthawk is not a fighter. It is actually a stealth bomber, and it handles like like a fighter. And so the developers, to get combat, to get the pilots to fly them, they told him, well, oh, it's a fighter. It's a new fighter. It's a new stealth fighter. So that's what. So, and then my third one, my third favorite, and I probably say this one most of the time when asked, the A-10 Warthog.
Oh,
It's a flying
that's an amazing aircraft.
a
Yeah,
flying tank,
that's a
man.
gun. That's very much like the Cobra. It's a gunship, except in a fixed wing platform.
Hell yeah. Well, speaking of gunships, have you seen the new uh was it the new C-130 gunships?
No, but I remember the old ones. So
These things are badass. They're just ridiculous. So
yeah, with the side ports with the 20 millimeter cannons and all that.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, it's so I'm just flabbergasted because this
they,
conversation it couldn't have gone any better, Tom.
well, I enjoyed it, and so I'm glad you did too. And
A couple of
it's
years ago, we did see some helicopters. They weren't Cobras, but they were Apaches. We saw
mm-hmm.
four Apache helicopters flying over our Walmart in formation. That was one of the coolest things I've ever seen as well.
Yeah. Well, the development in the helicopter field has been pretty tremendous too. At the time when I was there in 1972, the Cobra was probably the state of the art as far as helicopters. It
What
was
do
the
you think about
fastest. And
what do you think about going just strictly to the tilt rotor system? I think they're working on replacing the Blackhawk with a tilt rotor, aren't they?
yeah, I can't say that I'm knowledgeable enough to offer a well-informed opinion, and I know that some of the rotor aircraft like the Osprey have had some issues, and so I once they work through those safety issues, I mean the important thing about having the fixed rotor system is the ability to effectively auto rotate if you lose power, and that
Designed to
by
crash.
what's that?
Designed to crash.
Well, that's right. And what it means, even though you've been shot down, you don't necessarily have to die. You can't parachute out of a helicopter.
Right.
So you have to learn how to maintain the speed, keep the rotor blade spinning, and then at the very end you flare back, which increases the rotor force, and then you pull in pitch into the blades and it cushions you onto the landing. Theoretically, I've done that in combat once or twice, and it's not doesn't always work as well
It's not, I bet it's terrifying.
but the point is that they need to have some system to allow for safe landing or ejection, in the newly developed programs for pilot safety primarily.
Yeah, because I was
Obviously,
just
if
go
I
ahead.
was going to say, obviously, if it can be designed, and I'm not saying the Osprey's not safe. I mean, it has a, a number of crashes, but overall, it's an acceptable combat safety record.
It's
But
way more acceptable than a lot of places. Like it's way more safe than say, a certain communist country's aircraft. We could say that, I believe that they're safer.
well,
Their safety record does speak for itself, though. You're
it
absolutely right.
but the point I'm getting at is that the advantages of that type of system is increased range, dramatic increases in speed, cruising speed,
Oh
and
yeah.
carrying capacity. So my guess would be that that's the path of the future. Not to say that it will completely eliminate, the traditional rotary wing system, but it will become in and of its own an important component in army related aviation activities or marine related aviation activities, which require moving troops in and out of areas near the battle zone quickly and safely.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the techniques that was developed during Vietnam was combat helicopters and lifting in and out of the hot zones in the LZs.
Well, that's
Have you
right.
ever
I mean,
seen that movie?
if you have a unit that's been ambushed, and cut off, you can have, assuming there's radio communication and everything, you could have 200 additional troops,
A
a
perfect
third of a mile
example of that would
away
be
in a matter of an hour. So
yes, a perfect example of that would be the Battle of Ladrang Valley.
that's right. That's a good example.
That's one
A
of my favorite.
bloody, brutal example, but it's I was with two units when I was in Vietnam. One was an assault helicopter company where we basically we get missions, several missions a day, where we're just going out and shooting at targets or protecting troop, troops that were under fire, that type of thing. And then I spent some time in an air cavalry unit, which was a little bit different because there you were using the helicopters in small groups of infantry. They were troopers, but cavalry, but basically infantry that were coming in by helicopter and doing different things. So all of those things were experimented with, but the battle at Idrang was one where it was like the first true test of air cavalry. That was the first cav that was involved in that battle, if I remember correctly.
Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore and
Yeah,
company.
later a major general, I think he retired as.
Yeah, I so if you read the book We Were Soldiers,
Yes, a long time ago.
oh my
There was a movie
gosh.
too.
Yes, it's
Uh,
actually my favorite war movie. I can't even describe the feelings that I felt during that movie. Um I've never experienced anything like that, but these guys knew that this was very, like they kind of knew that they weren't coming home. And
well,
it,
I've had some experience with close combat, and it's different, when you're sort of face to face with death, and you can see the people that you're engaged with, and they can see you,
yeah,
and there's some of that built into this book. I mean, this book is sexy and violent, and there are a lot of human activities that this book deals with that are real activities. But I hope, even though it's a fictional character, I brought the emotion of what it's like to be in that part of the battle to this book as well.
I'm so like I said, Tom, this conversation couldn't have gone any better. I'm very, very impressed. I can't wait to open up this book, man. I can't wait to dig into it because like I said, this conversation's been so great that I just know that it's going to be fantastic. And I really appreciate you coming and hanging out with me today, Tom.
Well, I
I'm going to let
appreciate your
you
interest, and I really do hope you enjoy the ride, and you can share it with your fans,
I will
because
I
it's
tell you
something
what.
that I think they'll enjoy as well.
I'll tell you what, after I get done reading it, Tom, I'll get a hold of you again and we'll have another discussion because this has been great. And I love your outlook, the way you look at things. It's very similar to the way I look at things, but you have a more eloquent way of putting things. And not only that, but you've got some incredible experiences, man. And just the things that you've done in I know we all say that 70 years is a long time, but really it's a short time. And the things that you've accomplished and the things that you've done in that amount of time, holy hell, man. I, I thank you very much for your sacrifices and your attention to detail also. Like, oh my goodness. Just during this conversation, the attention to detail is mind-blowing. So I can't thank you enough, man. Thank you very, very much for coming and hanging out with me. Everybody, go buy this book and read this. And I'm going to give you guys a review on how this book is because like I cannot wait to to read it. Tom Equels, thank you very much. It's been an awesome conversation. I'm going to let you get out of here. I'm sure you got lots of stuff to do. But thank you very much for coming and hanging out with me, man.
Well, it's been an honor and a privilege. Thank you.
See ya.